Hello everyone. I've been reading the stories on this site for a while now, and I always check out the new stories. I come from a remote part of central Brazil, and growing up, I heard many stories from my family about the paranormal. The true story I'm going to tell you now has been told to me many times, and it always scares me a little. Our family has guardian angels, for lack of a better definition, who warn us of danger. There are actually two of them, and when I say angels, I really mean big black dogs. My great uncle was one of the leaders of our small community. He was practically the law around there. Whenever there was a dispute over land, some trouble between families or between people, he was the one they called to resolve it. When he was alive, he had a strong connection with the big black dogs, and whenever someone died, he knew that they would appear and talk to him. He always knew before anyone else of someone's death. This happened at home once. Now the stories. Prompt 1. This first story happened years ago, in the middle of the woods, and it happened to my uncle and my aunt. They had decided to go camping and fishing for the weekend. They went to a place in the region that was famous for good fishing. After unloading their bags and setting up camp, they went fishing. Before it got dark, my uncle and my aunt were standing on the riverbank, and my aunt noticed two big black dogs a little ways away from them, standing side by side. She pointed out the dogs to my uncle, and after he saw them, he got a little worried because there was no one else there with them. He grew up hearing stories about the dogs too. So after talking for a while, they decided it probably wasn't a good idea to stay there. So they packed up and put their things in the car and headed back to town before it got too late. 2 days later, they had forgotten about what had happened. And then on the evening news, they saw a story about a father and son who were fishing about 100 yards away who had been stabbed to death by a thief who, after killing and robbing them, threw their bodies in the river for the alligators to eat. The thief continued his killing spree for another 2 weeks when he was finally killed by the police. Prompt 2. This story is very sad. When my father and his brothers were in their early 20s, they would play soccer in the neighboring towns. This time my grandmother kept insisting that my father's younger brother go to the game in the same car they were in, and that they should take care of him. Everyone agreed and said they would take care of him, but this younger brother of theirs had a strong temper and ended up going in another car. The car he was in was hit by a gigantic truck, and he died instantly. After years of mourning, my grandparents said that earlier that day, they had stopped on the road to rest a little after a long trip to another city, and a huge truck flew past them. And to this day, they swear on their hand on the Bible that the person driving was not a man, but a black dog. Thank you for listening to my story. When I was 14, I was diagnosed with an intracranial tumor, also known as an angiofibroma. During my stay in the hospital, I would often ask myself, why me? Or, will this kill me? It wasn't good at all. Surgery came and went, and I recovered well, with the occasional headache reminding me of what I had been through. Well, before my surgery, I had never had a paranormal experience or imagined having one. But afterward, I was plagued with nightmare-like occurrences and strange noises. The night, it all started was like any other night. I was sleeping, and then I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone clapping. I looked at the clock first, and it was about 2:30 in the morning. Then I looked into the darkness of my room and saw a figure. It was a tall woman. She was pacing back and forth and clapping her hands. I screamed as loud as I could as I tried to reach the light switch. When I looked back, with the room already lit up, she was no longer there. My house has never had stories of hauntings or anything like that, but some things did happen. But about 10 months later, something worse happened. It was about 4 in the morning, and there were about 3 hours left until school. I was awake, and then I heard a sound that sounded like a large animal or something screaming outside my window. It sounded a lot like the sound the Tasmanian devil makes in cartoons. I was so scared I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. The second the screaming stopped, I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, where I woke up my mom and told her what had happened. She said I was too old for that, and I completely agreed and said I wasn't imagining anything. And then my mom got up and got the dog from the kitchen. She opened the door and let the dog out. After about 5 minutes, he ran back inside, scared of something. I told my mom, "Mom, I'm telling the truth. I heard something strange outside, and the dog came back scared. There's something out there." She just sighed and said I was imagining things and went back to bed. I never told her anything else that happened. Sometimes I ask myself things like, am I hallucinating these things? Am I going crazy? Did the tumor and the surgery affect something in my head? I don't think I'll ever know the answers to these questions, but the tumor doesn't explain why the dog was scared that morning. When most people hear the word ghost, they think of a footless creature covered in a sheet, causing trouble in someone's life. But in my case, things are a little different. One night, I went into the bathroom to prepare my bubble bath, as I do every Friday night. As I was pouring shampoo into the tub to make it foam, I noticed that the faucet was steaming up as if someone was breathing on it. I tried to convince myself that it was just the heat of the water, which I would have convinced myself if the faucet hadn't been steaming up and steaming up again. I just stared, determined to believe that it was just the steam from the water coming out of the tub. When the tub was almost full, I put my hand in to see if it was hot. It was the perfect temperature. I turned around, went to the door, hung up my robe, and went back to the tub. As soon as I stepped into the tub, a chill took over my body and I jumped out of it. The water was freezing cold, as if I had poured ice water into the tub. But before I could get out of the tub, I just felt, I didn't see anything, something grabbing my arm and pulling me back into the water. I think I hit my head somewhere and fell unconscious, because I woke up a while later still in the tub, with my head only a few inches above the water. I was too scared to move. I just looked around and saw nothing. When I looked at my body, it was covered in bruises, scratches, and a few small cuts. After a while, I gathered the courage to get up and get out of the tub. Every inch of my body hurt. But I got out without feeling anything strange and without being attacked again. To this day, I don't know what happened, and I have no idea what could have attacked me so brutally, because I didn't stay there long enough to find out. I moved a few weeks later. But the memory of that night is burned into my head. Some psychologists and therapists have said that I imagine it all, that I must have been reliving some traumatic childhood experience. I may not be a doctor or a psychologist, but I know that what happened there had nothing to do with any traumatic childhood experience. There was something in that apartment that attacked me for no apparent reason. This all happened when I was about 8 years old. A lot of things happened, and they always happen at night. What is it about the night? I remember one night, around 1 a.m., I was lying in bed, awake as usual, when suddenly I heard a car pull into the driveway and a little girl say, "Bye, Daddy." I heard the car door close and the car drive away, and then a minute or so later, I heard a scream. I jumped out of bed and looked out the window. Of course, there was nothing there. Everything was perfectly calm. My whole body shivered. So, a month later, around midnight, I was awake in bed again, trying to sleep. I slept with my door open at that time. Then I heard what I can only describe as pots and pans banging against each other, and the stove burners being thrown to the floor. All the windows downstairs were rattling violently. It was so loud. I was so scared that I covered myself with a blanket and stayed there until I fell asleep. The next day, everyone said they hadn't heard anything during the night. I would hear footsteps on the stairs. My bed was positioned in a way that you could see the entire hallway perfectly. No one ever came up the stairs. The footsteps kept going like someone was going up and down, like the stairs went on forever. I would also hear knocking coming from my extremely small closet. Just a knock, knock, knock. And one night, I got up and went to look inside. There was nothing there, and when I got back into bed, knock, knock, knock. This went on all night until I fell asleep. But the scariest thing that ever happened to me was during the day. I was sitting in the living room with a friend of mine, playing with the kittens that my cat had just had. It was just the two of us in the house. Suddenly I started to smell cigarette smoke. My friend asked me, "Do you smell that?" And I said, "I am." And she pointed to the TV and said, "Look." The TV was off, but in the reflection of it, I could see a woman standing behind us, smoking a cigarette. I turned around and she was gone. Later I told my mother what had happened, and she started to cry. The woman I described to her was a perfect description of her mother, my grandmother, who had died 6 years earlier. A lot of strange things happened in that house. I could hear deep voices coming from behind the TV when it was off. People whispering my name in my ear. Knocking coming from upstairs when everyone was downstairs. Footsteps in the night. I could spend all day writing about everything that has happened to me, but I think you get the idea. My family moves a lot, about once a year. The last time we moved, we left Santa Catarina, where I had spent 14 years of my life, for Rio de Janeiro. We moved to a new house that had just been built. I have always had experiences with ghosts in almost every house I have lived in. It seems that I always end up meeting one. This particular experience happened after 2 years of living in this new house, and I was 16 years old. Nothing strange had happened to me since we had moved, but shortly before this happened, I started hearing voices around the house. When there was no one else home but me, I remember the day I came home from school and decided to rest a little before doing my homework. While I was lying down, I looked at the closet which I had left open. Then I heard a strange noise, as if someone had knocked on a door. At the time, I thought it was one of my brothers outside in the garage, since my room was next to the garage, or that it was my imagination. I simply ignored it and ended up sleeping. However, the knocking came back that night and the following nights. During that time, sometimes I would wake up and, to my surprise, I would be sitting on the bed with my legs crossed, as if I were meditating, and I am not a person who meditates. As time went by, the knocking would come every other night, without fail. I woke my father up and told him about the knocking one night, and he went to see what it was, but he couldn't find anything. I thought it might be some animal in the garage, but sometime later that idea was discarded. One night, things got really serious. The knocking would come every 15 minutes or so, and I thought that if I stayed awake a little longer, maybe it would go away. I went to my computer and started talking on ICQ with a friend of mine, and ended up talking about the knocking. She got curious and told me to call her so she could hear the knocking. I went to the living room to get the cordless phone. When I got back to my room, I started dialing her phone, and before I could finish the call, the knocking started getting louder, only this time it seemed to be coming from inside the room. It was coming from the table, the door, the bed, the closet, the window, the wall, from everywhere, and it was getting louder and louder. So I threw myself on the floor and curled up at the foot of my bed, scared to death, waiting for the knocking to stop. Then I had a strange feeling and an uncontrollable urge to run out of my room. And that's exactly what I did. I got up and ran outside and went into the nearest room, the bathroom. As soon as I got into the bathroom, I closed the door, and before I could think of what to do, something literally threw itself against the door. My only reflex was to lean against the door to stop it from opening. After that, I couldn't hear anything outside. The house was completely silent, but I still didn't leave the bathroom and ended up sleeping inside. The next morning, I told my family what had happened, and I swore I wouldn't sleep in that room again. I ended up switching rooms with my brother that same day. He never complained about anything in the room, and he never heard the knocking. And I never heard or witnessed anything else in the house after that night. I'm used to supernatural things happening to me, but what happened this time scared me to the point that now I'm afraid to stay home alone and hear that knocking again. And what was the thing that followed me? I don't know if I really want to know. My husband and I have had many experiences with the unexplained. We moved into our apartment on August 1st, 2001. We always felt something strange about the place. The first time something happened was 2 months later, on a Thursday. My husband was working late. As usual, I had come home from my mother's house and had gone to watch TV. I started to feel something strange coming from the hallway and decided to turn on the light there. The switch is right at the beginning of it. I went back to the couch, and as soon as I sat down on it, the hallway light started to turn on and off. I could hear the sound of the switch moving. I could see the switch turning on and off from where I was sitting. This lasted about 10 seconds. I was simply terrified, and the worst part was that I was alone in the house. After my husband arrived, he calmed me down, trying to convince me that it was just an electrical problem, but I know it wasn't. Since then, sometimes when I'm in the shower, which faces a hallway, I see someone leave the bedroom and go to the living room. So I call my husband, thinking it was him, and he comes out of the room. My husband started to notice that our 2 cats were meowing in the hallway and at the bathroom door. The cat, Mimi, was scratching the door and the carpet under the door for no apparent reason. One day my husband was sitting exactly where I was when the light kept turning on and off, and Mimi started meowing at the closed bathroom door. And then she started playing with something that was on the floor in front of the door. He said that then it seemed like something had grabbed her paw and was pulling, which made her fall to the side and be pulled against the door, through the gap under the bathroom door. She started screaming, and my husband got up to help her. And as soon as he pulled her paw from under the door, she got up and ran away. He opened the door, and there was nothing in there that could have caused it. Last year, I was in the shower at about 8:30 p.m., and my husband was at work. The bathroom was steamy. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed handprints forming on the mirror. I usually leave the bathroom door open, and I was thinking that maybe it was a cold breeze coming from outside and catching the mirror in a certain way that made handprints. Just as I had convinced myself that it was just the wind, the shower curtain opened, as if someone had pulled it violently. I was paralyzed with fear. After about 2 seconds, the door closed. I just sat down and huddled on the shower floor. I don't remember much after that, but I remember hearing Mimi meowing on the other side of the door. I don't know how long I was in there, but it couldn't have been long since the heat is gas, and we only had hot water for about 20 minutes. After a while, I got up, grabbed a towel, and ran to the car. I went to my husband's work and called him from my cell phone, saying that I was in the car in the parking lot, only wearing a towel and wrapped in a blanket that I had there. I told him what had happened. He said that we couldn't leave the apartment since we didn't have the money to do so. So now I refuse to go home after work until he gets there. The only thing I know about this place is that it was a house before and it burned down. After that, they used the land to build our apartment building. But from what I've been told, no one died in the fire. I have no idea what could be going on in this house, but I'm terrified of being alone.